Welcome to this Mark's Reviews and Tutorials video. I'm building a gate around the spa here, and I'm just going to give you a few little tips around some of the things that have to be very specific about your fence if you want it to be compliant for the fencing things. Now, fencing things that don't only change what you have to do country to country, they also change state to state, and they also change shire to shire. So you do have to check in with your local shire as to what their requirements are. So that you know what your fence needs to be. They need to be non-climbable. I'm just going to go through a quick list. This is not an exhaustive list, but I'm going to go through a quick list here of all the things that you have to have. If you see there where I've got this picket fence going, there's quite a gap between the top rail and the bottom rail. That is because from the bottom rail here, from the top of that, you need to be able to measure 90 to the top of the next one. So there's no chance of climbing on it and being able to climb in to the pool enclosure. That's the first one. They also stipulate that with your hinges, you'll see the hinge gap is exactly the same there. It's got to be 90 from the top of that. So someone puts their toe, they've got to be able to stretch up 90, 900 millimeters or 90 centimeters it is, up there before their next step. Now, if I wanted, I can have a 100 mil gap between these guys here, and that is quite large. If you see the gap between there and there, I could miss a paling and put the next paling here. When you're working with timber, it's very important to know that it does shrink a little bit, it does move a little bit. So if you're going to be doing a precise gap, give yourself a millimetre or two clearance. So don't run it out to a 10 centimetre gap, run it out to a 9.8 if you're going to do that. But I could have missed every second panel along here. A couple of reasons why I didn't. One is that it doesn't look as good. I think the more palings you have on a fence like this, that it absolutely looks the part and looks better. And two is that around the corner here, you see I have this gate and it has a step in it. There's going to be a gate here. Now this, from the bottom of the step here, is 1.2, which is the required height. But these guys here are actually 1.5 meters down to the bottom here. Now again, you've got a maximum gap underneath of 100 mil here in this area that I'm at. Now that's a little hole. We're going to attempt to get a little cat through there to see if he can come or go, but they don't make exceptions for cats. You still have to stick with the regulations. So it's a maximum of 100 mil gap between the bottom of the fence and the ground. Now the reason that I had to go with the paneling is because this is high. It's not 90 between this rail and this rail. So if I'd gone with the 100 mil gap through here, someone could put their foot on there, climb over. This fence here wouldn't have passed the regulations because it needs to have that non-steppable range. Now, the same, if you had a glass panel, obviously no one's going to be able to walk on the rails in order to be able to get in. The regulations here state that if this gap here is less than 13 mil or less, then it's considered, like I can't get my finger in there, so no one's going to get their toe in and be able to climb on that. So by putting the gap as 13 mil or less, this is an 11 mil gap, because again, these can twist and move at the top and it has to stay within that 13 mil level. So that is considered the same as a glass panel, that now you don't worry about the rails behind it because they don't come into play. You've got this step here comes into play. It still has to be 1.2 off that to the top of the fence. And this, I'm just going to continue the line straight across. We could have gone lower once we got a certain distance away from the step there, but we're not. We're going to continue that right the way across. So there'll be 1.5 across for the gate. Now the other thing with the latching and catching for your gate, just imagine the gates here. If you've got a standard 1.2 gate, it needs to be, I think it was 1.8 to the top of the latch where you actually hook that gate, because they can stand on the bottom rung here if you got your 100 mil gap between and get up to the rail. So it's about them not being able to open the gate. If you have the 13 mil or less gap, all of a sudden they can't get through. So you can actually make your gate latch down and over the other side, which makes it safe in that way. If you don't have the gaps, you've got a reach through gap in your fence, you've gone for the 100, then you need to go for those pool poles where the magnetic latch comes up the top. I'll put a picture here for you, which is 1.8 off the ground. So that's another benefit of having the smaller or less than 13, so I can put a reach over latch to the top, which can be opened, and self-latching, self-closing is a lot less complicated and just a bit prettier. We're going, you see we've got some arches through here approaching that spar area. That spar will disappear to a big degree when that fence comes right along at that level. It'll really look the part. So there you go, there's just one or two of the regulations. There's also climb down regulations about whether or not they can come down. They're very complicated. They're coming down to the size of what people can stand on, such as tops of poles, rails, posts, etc. So I'm not going to get into that. That's the sort of stuff you check with your local council. And in Australia now, you do actually have to get someone to come out and sign off on your fence to say that you've done it all to the approved level. Now again, with trees near a fence, you'll notice I've got that on the inside, not the outside. The same over here. This archway here is close to the back. You don't have to worry about people getting out of the spar area. You just have to worry about them getting in. So this has to be quite a distance back. Even though they're very small and very light, it still has to be back so that you can't climb up here and then use it as a way of getting in. That's why that step comes into play. And you can't go and put a pot plant here or something. Well, you can up to that height, but you can't put a pot plant, something which reduces that 1.2 to the top. So when you've got a pool or spar fence, you do actually have to be pretty solid on what you can put in front of it and how far away plants are and whether the plants are climbable or not. See, I've got a creeper coming through here, but these branches by no means are something that can be stood on or are climbable. They'll just snap straight off, and they don't get any thicker and any stronger than that, so that's okay. But if you had a tree with branches, anything substantial that can be climbed down, then you can't have it inside the spar area where someone could climb. This is on a boundary fence, come and climb in. And the spar itself had to be 0.5 metre, 500 millimetres off the fence, again, to make it non-climbable. And you can't go putting things on here which can be a ladder and climbing down. So there's lots and lots and lots of regulations. It's very complicated. But that's just a bit of a rundown, just a bit of a start for you. But you do have to check, get on the internet, have a look for your local council and find out what their swimming pool regulations are. This spar, the clip down cover, see it's a hard cover that clips down like that. In certain states in Australia, that's adequate. The height of the spar and the fact that it's got a clip down cover, it's considered safe. Not a problem. You don't have to put a fence around it. But where we are here in Victoria, the current legislation says full pool fence, exactly the same as if that was a swimming pool. This needs to be fenced to the same standards and regulations. So it's different countries, different states, different shires, and you have to find out what the rules are for you. So there's just a quick rundown. If you've got more questions, stick them in the comments down below, and I'll when there's a few there, I'll answer them. So there's a bit of a resource down there. If you've got some other things you want to add, go for it, stick it into the comments, and we'll good luck building your full fence if you're going to have a go yourself, or if you call the professionals. Again, they will need to get a certificate of compliance at the end, or at least you do in Australia, to make sure that it complies with all the different stipulations. No gap bigger than 100 at the bottom or in the sides or the slots or between the gates. Anywhere it can't be bigger than 100. And you've got your climb down regs, as I said, to make sure people can't climb down and get onto the top of the fence. So there's lots to it. And the gate does need to be self-closing and self-latching, so that whenever you come through, the gate also, I didn't mention, needs to swing out and away. So if the gate is sitting there on the latch, not quite latched, and a kid comes running up, bang, it locks. You can't have a situation where the gate opens inward. If a kid comes running up, boom, he goes straight through. So self-closing, self-latching, and it has to swing out and away from the pool and spar as well. So good luck. There's just a rundown. That's not exhaustive. That's not definitive or anything like that. Just a rundown to give you a bit of a heads up at the start. 13mm gap, 90mm between your rails. If there's greater than a 13mm gap, it can be up to 100. No greater than 100 across the bottom. Yeah, that's just a few. Okay, good luck.